Okay, great. Thank you all for joining us. I know it's been already a compact and full morning talking about also, this is going to be weird. Okay, we will figure this out together. So we're really excited to have you here today. We want to talk a little bit about the role and the impact that AI in particular is having or may potentially have in the world of scams and fraud. We have a really great panel. I'm going to start the conversation, though, talking about a few different issues and kind of warming us up for the panelists, and I'll give you a sense of what they're going to talk about when we get there. So first of all, this is probably not surprising to you. You have seen many of these headlines. You are all aware of the fact that people are really, really worried about what AI is going to do to fraud and scams and where it's going to go. You have heard some of these sort of crazy stories about grandkids calling and asking for money from their grandparents, but it wasn't really them, it was a deep fake. And we are cognizant of the fact that this is top of mind to people and an area of real concern. But we want to get into what we actually know to be true before we get into some of the concerns around hype. So first of all, when it comes to fraud losses, we know they're increasing. This is data from the FTC. I think that some of this has already been covered, in fact, earlier today. We know that they're on the rise. We know that the losses have gone up. In fact, from 2014 to 2024, there's been a rather exponential rise. And we've seen an increase even into 2020, where, sorry, I need to move something out of the way. Okay. Where we've seen things the loss is really on the rise. A few other facts. How is AI actually showing up in scams? What are we seeing so far? What is real? We know that AI can enable sort of hidden malware, essentially giving people links or hidden into code where, in fact, when they click on it or they execute the code, there's actually malware present. So we know AI is enabling that. We know that it's increasing the likelihood of automated scams, so enabling scale and reach, and of course, deep fakes, which we'll talk a little bit more in a little bit. Microsoft telemetry shows the evidence of bot-driven fraud as well, and domain impersonation, which is another area to be aware of. But it's also really hard for us at this stage, when it comes to what data we have access to actually separate the hype from the reality. That's a challenging thing that I think is something we're all going to be dealing with in the years to come. So one thing that we wanted to set out to do is to understand how people are actually experiencing fraud in the age of AI. And again, this is really hard data to get at, but we want to know what we're learning about AI through the lens of those who are actually experiencing fraud. And so what we did was we actually have a partnership with the Better Business Bureau and AARP to get access to some of their Fraud Watch data, where we were able to actually analyze the experience that people were having. And so now keep in mind, people don't necessarily know if the scam or the fraud that they're experiencing is AI enabled. There were some ways that we were able, using these data sets, to get at some of that information. Okay, so one of the things we were trying to figure out is, can we actually determine if AI was used in these scams? And what we've seen is that the number of cases of AI reports in scams has actually increased. So it's increased from 28 back in, I think that was 2021, all the way to 577. But because, as I mentioned before, as we know, scams and frauds is on the rise in and of itself, the percentage of overall scams remains pretty solid. That AI-enabled scams and fraud remain at about 0.9%, which is still quite small. But again, as we see the rise, we see the use of this increasing as well. In fact, it's a 20-time increase since 2023. So there's a bit of a question of how much of that is the tip of the iceberg, or how much of this is a trend that we're going to see to come. The scam landscape is shifting online. So one thing that we notice is the use of phone for scams is actually decreasing, as we see web and social and email on the rise. This is important because we think that the likelihood of AI to be used in those types of scams is actually far more likely than in the phone scams. And so while we want to be careful not to draw a correlation necessarily between the decrease in phone scams and the increase of online scams, there's a high likelihood that they are in fact related. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about the phishing is on the rise. Hang on one second. Sorry about that. So what we're seeing is that while phishing share is on the rise, especially after we see that AI becoming broadly available has gone up, one thing that we did see in the data from both AARP and Better Business Bureau is that phishing scams are not actually increasing as much, according to the reports that we were getting from elderly Americans. But what we are finding is, of course, AI-augmented phishing is, in fact, more convincing. And again, whether this is because of translation tools or the use of AI to increase the targeting, we have seen that they are more convincing in their nature, in large part because of the way they're able to connect with their audience in a way that is maybe harder for them to have done before. So again, when we talk about the hype versus what the reality is, we're questioning always how much the hype matches the reality. And the truth is, one of the areas that you hear a lot about, and I mentioned it before, is this idea of imposter scams, the grandchild who has called their grandparent and it's not actually them. Using AI, we were able to go through the data to try and figure out how often those sort of relationships were actually connected, and it's actually quite infrequent. And so again, we want to be careful not to say, oh, you guys don't need to worry about AI and deepfakes, because in fact, there's a high likelihood that that will become more normal in the future. But right now, we're just not seeing it in the data. We're not seeing that these imposter scams of grandchildren, of families, are actually what they're dealing with. And we saw the same thing from the Better Business Bureau data as well. So we looked at both AARP for this as well as Better Business Bureau. But imposter scams are increasingly, or remain to be the main way that older Americans are targeted with scams. And imposter, just to be clear, does not necessarily mean a family relationship. Imposter can be a business or someone they think that they know. In fact, the number of actual family relationships, as I mentioned, is not actually that frequent, but the number of imposter scams are actually used quite a lot for older Americans. And as I mentioned, you don't necessarily need to have an actual relationship with the person for it to be an imposter scam. So we've seen that imitating a business, which is of concern to businesses like Microsoft, because ours is often the brand that is being used to try and trick people into engaging. The imposter can be a business that they're familiar with, a brand that they trust. So scam failure rates are actually increasing after we saw a dip back in 2024. We don't know exactly what causes this. I want to be careful not to infer causation, but it could be related to scammers using newly released products and people not being prepared for them. It could be that some of the education efforts have actually been successful. Again, we don't want to be too sure about why we're seeing that drop, but that is an interesting stat that we want to keep paying closer attention to. Okay, so just a few key insights, which we've already essentially established, which is, look, fraud patterns are shifting. They're moving to text-based, away from phone. That's what we're seeing, which means that AI is more likely to be used, and it's going to be a lot harder to detect. We know that the back-end use of AI likely outpaces the victim-facing AI, with fraud patterns shifting to text-based modalities. Public awareness should continue to be a focus on the highest impact risk categories, such as phishing and business impersonation, and cautiously avoid overhyping the sort of deep fake concerns that people continue to have out there, or those family scams. And then thoughtful education and policy are needed, really, to direct resources where they can have the greatest effect. Okay, so those are some of the insights that we have so far, but the rest of the conversation is going to be a lot more interesting, because that's when you're going to hear from the experts talking about where we go from here. And so where do we go from here? One thing is, we know that the onus cannot always fall on the individual. We do not want to focus on the person who's being scammed. There is a lot that can be said, and we'll get to it when we talk about some of the education elements, but we recognize that this is one of those things where we need a defense in depth approach. So first and foremost, we're going to start, am I not going backwards? First and foremost, we're going to start talking about policy and legislation. What can governments do? This is an area where we need to have shared responsibilities, and there is a role for governments around the world on this. So we're going to be joined by Jenni Katzman, who's on our government affairs team, along with Stephen Masada, who leads our digital crimes unit. And they're going to have a conversation about what legislation and policies are out there to get a sense of what that landscape looks like. And then we're going to shift into disruption. Disruption is an area where essentially the bad guys are being held accountable. I will say, having had some conversations at like an AARP conference and a few other places with some victims, they get very angry when they think that the onus is on them to protect themselves. They get very frustrated and they're like, what are you all doing to stop the bad guys who are starting this? And so disruption is a critical component to ensuring that we're all tackling this issue together. So we'll have a conversation between both Stephen Masada and then James Silver of DOJ to talk about what disruption looks like. We're then going to talk a little bit about what it looks like to collaborate across companies, share data, create a better product safety environment. And for that, we're going to have Chris Compton from our own CFAR team and Abigail Bishop of Amazon. And they're going to talk about what it's like to share information and work on product safety, because that's also a critical component as technology companies. We have a role to play in stopping fraud and scams as well. And then, as I mentioned, we're going to round it out with Lisa Reppell on the Microsoft team, as well as Alex Glazerbrook at the Older Adults Technology Services, which is part of AARP's education arm. And they're going to talk about some effective uses of education. Essentially, how do you reach out to people who are likely targets of scams? How do you work with them on making sure that they are able to protect themselves? And then again, what are the obligations of other organizations in that space as well? And then we will shift over after that to a final session, if we have time, to talk a little bit about how we're also seeing AI used as a defender against scams and frauds. Because as much as it is weaponized in this space, it can be a tool as well. And so we'll spend some time talking about that. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleagues who are going to start with policy and legislation.
You want to sit on the far side?
Hi, all. My name is Jenni Katzman. As Ginny said, I'm with Microsoft's Government Affairs team.
And I'm Stephen Masada. Now I see what Jenny was dealing with. My name is Stephen Masada. I'm the head of the Digital Crimes Unit at Microsoft.
Great. And so Ginny, I think, laid this out really nicely, and we're here to talk about the legislation and policy. Now, you obviously heard a little bit about that earlier today when we had the representatives talking about what they're doing on the caucus, but we've also have been working for the last year and a half plus.
Is that all? It
Yes.
seems like longer.
It's Microsoft years, longer. But we've been working for the last year and a half on legislation related to this issue. And just to sort of give some background on how that all came about, Microsoft has long had a history of wanting to be responsible in the online ecosystem and protecting its users, particularly its most vulnerable users. In lots of different spaces beyond the fraud space and child sexual abuse material, we helped to put together a photo DNA along with Dartmouth College back in 2009, which is a technology used to detect and to remove child sexual abuse material. It's now licensed all over the world. So we have a long history of wanting to protect our users and to be good citizens digitally. And so when AI, or generative AI, first really jumped in on the scene with ChatGPT in November of 2022, we were already proactively thinking about, technology and AI particularly, we are super optimistic about. We know it's going to do really great things. It already is. But understanding that all technology in the hands of bad actors is susceptible to really bad things. And I think we've heard today some really poignant examples of that. And so in February of 2024, our president, Brad Smith, laid out 6 areas that would lead to a comprehensive strategy for combating AI-generated harms. And there's 6 areas on there. One of those areas was modernized policy and legislation, realizing that, you want to take a tailored approach to this issue, but you also need to sometimes with new technology have new legislation. And so we worked together on a white paper that was launched this summer of 2024 called How to Protect the Public from Abusive AI-Generated Content. And there were 4 harms particularly highlighted in there, and one was financial fraud. And we realized when we were doing this that in a lot of the other areas, we were able to endorse legislation. But in the financial fraud space, we didn't see anything at the time. Little do we know, if we waited a year and a half, maybe we would have seen more. But we didn't see anything at the time that really we felt addressed the issue. So we wanted to go about trying to address it. And so, Stephen, you want to talk a little bit about what we decided was after talking to a number of stakeholders and people in the field, what we thought would be a responsible way to do this.
Sure. I mean, everyone knows that fraud and scams are as old as time, right? And we're not going to legislate our way out of fraud and scams. We're not going to arrest our way out of fraud and scams. But we can put a dent in the ecosystem. We can degrade their abilities. And here at Microsoft, as evidenced by what we're discussing here today, we try to take a comprehensive approach. It's not simply just disruption. It's not simply just education. It's not simply just legislation. It's taking all of those tools and adding them to a toolkit. Some of the data that we've heard even during the conference here today, it's staggering. I think the number in the original session was $422 billion lost to fraud and scams. I think that's right. I see people nodding. I'm a former trial attorney, so I like to try to put that in context, right? Because at some level, at some point, numbers lose meaning, right? That's a big number. So 422 million, that's approximately the GDP of the country of Denmark. To put that into perspective, that's the current valuation of companies like Netflix and Costco. $420 billion is basically the annual revenue of Apple. Like, that's a huge, staggering amount of money. So when Jenni and I approached this from the legislative angle, we looked at what worked and we looked at examples. So we took the example of the Truth in Caller ID Act, which is, I guess, an act that was passed to prevent robocalling. Some of you may have recalled the story about the voice cloning of Joe Biden around the New Hampshire primary. Sometime in January, shortly before the primary, I think 2 days, an individual named Steve Kramer, I remember his name because he has the same name as me, he sent out over 1,000 robocalls, voice cloning Joe Biden, basically encouraging them to not vote, to save their vote for the general election, which of course had some material impact. Well, the FCC used the Truth in Caller ID Act to impose a staggering fine on him. I believe it was $6 million, which had a material impact. There was also criminal proceedings initiated against him as well. So when we were thinking of what worked, we looked at that as a model. We worked with outside counsel. We talked to, countless. Jenni and I have had this conversation dozens of times, talked to numerous stakeholders in civil society, in government, in industry, because again, as we've heard here today, scams, that's a bipartisan issue. Nobody is pro-scam. And so what we did is we modeled a proposed legislation, which we've called the
AI Fraud Prevention Act,
which, again, brings together, it's not simply a criminal tool, because, again, that's important. My friend here, James Silver from DOJ, will appreciate this, but it also provides what I think is actually the meat of this proposed legislation, is it provides civil remedies for the FTC and states' attorney generals to prevent citizens or their residents when they encounter actors who engage in bad conduct, fraud, that utilize artificial intelligence. Now, what does this statute do, or what does this proposed legislation do? Well, I think it does a few things. First, it adds clarity. So again, what folks in industry are worried about, for example, is this patchwork of legislation that we get, different definitions. What does deep fake mean? So this proposed legislation, for example, creates a uniform definition of deep fake, so everyone's under the same understanding on what it entails. Also, individual states attorney generals, they have what's called UDAP laws, that protects individuals and residents that engage in commerce. But those differ across all states. They criminalize, or I'm sorry, they prohibit different activities, and they provide different relief for violations. So this act again would create a consistent law that could be utilized by FTCs, but also states attorney generals to again enjoin activity, but also seek monetary relief on behalf of their residents. This act also provides clarity, because again, it also specifically carves out from what is prohibited by this legislation, good faith attempts to train, to develop artificial intelligence. And it directs the FTC within 6 months of passage to create even further clarity about what is and isn't permissible under this law. And finally, I think it adds flexibility, right? There are criminal laws that exist, wire fraud, bank fraud, you name it, that could be used in this space when bad actors utilize deepfake technology. But this is simply another tool in the toolkit for criminal prosecutors, because as you know, as I know as a former prosecutor, as James knows, sometimes what those prosecutors need, what those agents need, FBI or Secret Service, you name it, federal law enforcement, what they need is different routes to hold bad actors accountable based on the available evidence. So again, I think this legislation tries to take a comprehensive approach to a very complicated problem.
Yeah, thank you, Stephen. That was a really great overview of the bill, which we are expecting to be introduced very soon on a bicameral and bipartisan basis. We think this month, possibly even as soon as next week. So stay tuned. Hopefully it will be out very soon for you all to read. But if you have any questions about it, we're always happy to answer any questions after the session too. But we're thinking about what will actually pass in Congress. I know there's often a lot of concern that things will not pass, but we've seen in this Congress a template of something passing, right? So I think on the slide that Ginny had up earlier, it had the Take It Down Act down. And for those of you who don't know, that was a bill to combat AI-generated non-consensual intimate imagery. Some people refer to it as like deepfake pornography, right? And that had a lot of bipartisan support. I can't remember the exact vote in each of the House and Senate, but I think there were just a few people that did not vote for it. And obviously it was signed into law by the president. And so what we've learned from that is that bipartisan bills that are narrowly tailored, that don't try to do everything, are the ones that are more likely to pass. And we think like the Take It Down Act, like something like non-consensual intimate imagery, that also it doesn't have, red or blue on it, that fraud, AI-generated fraud, is something that everybody can get behind. We think this is a proposal that we are working on that also can generate lots of support because it doesn't try to do everything. And not that comprehensive bills are a bad thing, but in this type of Congress, they're probably unlikely to succeed. And so we hope you will stay tuned and that you will follow this bill when it comes out. And if you're here with any organization that addresses this issue, a company, we'd love to have your support on it too. So I'm going to turn it back over to Stephen for the next part of this. Thank you.
James Silver, everyone. Oh. Is that on? Yeah. Thank you. Welcome. Absolutely. Oh.
Good afternoon. I want to thank Stephen and my Microsoft colleagues for inviting me this afternoon. I had some slides that kind of cover the IC3.gov data, but I think I'm going to focus really on a question that, from the DOJ perspective is close to my heart and maybe where I can add the most to the discussion, which is what disruption looks like when we're talking about cybercrime and cyber-enabled scams. To echo some of what previous commenters, including Stephen, said, scams aren't going to go away. And as I am a prosecutor, as I'm focused on charges and arrests, I don't harbor illusions that I can charge and arrest scammers and that will be done with it. It's more a question of what we can do to increase trust, to give consumers and citizens confidence that their government is acting appropriately and energetically to lower these threats and make them manageable. And so when it comes to cyber-enabled scams and AI-enabled scams, I, based on my time in the department, it's been almost 20 years now. It's really it's a fascinating array of different scam cultures and local scams, and scams. There are entire scam cities in Romania that are engaged in particular types of scams, selling non-existent cars on eBay. We're getting a lot of attention now to the Southeast Asia-based scam centers, which are really multidisciplinary in many ways and using AI in a variety of ways. We see tech support scams coming out of a number of regions, especially including India, and so each of those for me presents a different problem set and a different set of tools that we use to try and bring these scam challenges under control. I think that one of the issues that we grapple with here is, given the foreign nexus of a lot of these organizations, how do we bring local law enforcement into play as part of a partnership? We obviously have to be tracking sovereignty concerns. We want to make sure that we are not leaning too hard on the other country, basically, trying to push them around. It has to be respectful, but also highly coordinated. And that's an area where we're often going to work. We at DOJ will work with FBI legal attaches or legats, also HSI, Secret Service. Many federal law enforcement agencies have personnel deployed in those countries who are sitting right in the middle of those critical law enforcement relationships. We also have at DOJ our Office of International Affairs with expertise on things like extraditions, deportations, expulsions, the various legal mechanisms you would use to move a defendant lawfully between countries. So the foreign nexus of these scam centers is really going to influence the approach. But when we talk about disruption and AI specifically, I think that we are we're thinking about a number of things. We're thinking about what technologies are they using? How can we work with providers that may be providing those technologies to control that illicit use? And how can we do so in a way that works for that business, but also has an impact on the bad actors? I think that we see criminals using AI the same way the legitimate business people do, and I think also that, as I look across the different kinds of crime that I oversee the prosecution of, whether it's ransomware, counterfeiting, trade secret theft, scams increasingly, scams are labor intensive. When we talk about earning someone's trust or winning someone's trust, that emphasizes in our language that it's a lot of work to do that. And AI makes that so much easier. That distance to establishing trust has shortened immensely, and previous speakers have explained how. So these are some of the figures from IC3 that I mentioned, and I think that for me it's a tidal wave that we're increasingly concerned about, and I don't want to hype up the AI element of it too much, but I do attribute some of these increases to the increased efficiencies available from AI. For those who don't know, and I know IC3 has been discussed previously in the conference, this is an FBI-led platform, IC3.gov, that ingests complaints not only from the U.S. but actually from around the world. So while I'm going to express envy for Stephen's discussion of Microsoft's telemetry, this is something that the government has that ingests complaints, and we try to point people to this. And I want to credit FBI for doing a lot of work to make this easier to use, so that if you are hit by a scam or a crime, you go in, you get a much more modern interface that leads you to the fields that you were asked to enter into. If you want to go next slide. I want to point out here that the types of crime that are causing the most loss. I think we can easily imagine how AI is figuring into these with the investment scams. We see AI being used to personalize approaches. There's a great UNODC report on emerging threats from September 2025 that speaks about AI in particular and points out how the actors are using AI to make much more personalized, bespoke, compelling pitches. And they can prepare it for certain victim audiences. In the case of investment fraud, even using AI buzzwords to make the investment seem more compelling. But a variety of different kinds of investment fraud, and we're seeing the use of AI to surmount that language barrier, to appear to be sufficiently fluent in English to basically be able to start up that conversation, make that pitch, and keep it going until there is a bite on the hook. So obviously, the connection between BEC and deepfakes has been well documented, and we're tracking that as well. I think if you want to go to the next one. I think that for me, what I'm seeing really is that the distance to trust, I'll call it, is just very much shortened, and that is something that I think in part, is based on our reliance in certain methods of authentication. And I think the pandemic drove us into some of these methods of authentication where you have a digital process of building trust. And I think that now, I'm not a regulator or prosecutor, but I think now we are starting to rethink the limitations of that. Obviously, it brings enormous benefits to society, but it also creates some risks that now, as generative AI becomes more mature, we're seeing some of the limitations of these systems. I'll point out KYC, for those who don't know, maybe it's know your customer requirements. The ability to prove for FinCEN purposes, that's the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, that you are who you say you are. This is intended as an anti-money laundering control. We're seeing AI being used to circumvent those controls and to provide a convincing dupe that you are, claiming to be one person and fooling the bank, but in fact, you're somebody else. Concretely, it's using AI to create a compelling fake ID, a compelling fake photo, et cetera. So, back to the disruption. I mean, the playbook for me is laid out here pretty well. We charge when we can. We go after the people, the money, the assets, whether it's online infrastructure, domains, whatever we can. But really welcome the discussion of the new bill because civil actions by private parties may play a really important role here. And what we can do as prosecutors, and I've worked in-house before, we can manage parallel cases and we can share information and we can find ways to allow a criminal prosecution and a civil action to both proceed where the courts are aware of each other. We can share information. Pause here, pause there to coordinate. It's interesting that I know this from prior practice, but when a defendant takes the fifth in a criminal case, that can be used against them in a civil case. So there are things that actually can intersect and advance both. Technical disruptions of criminal infrastructure. We have the ability to do a number of things in that front going after infrastructure. It depends on what the infrastructure is. My section's been involved in things like seizing back cryptocurrency from ransomware actors. It just depends on what we learn about the actors. But actually seizing back cryptocurrency is within our realm as well. OFAC sanctions. I've bolded the last three because I really think that the emphasis on foreign partners, working with those countries, understanding their authorities, finding like-minded prosecutors and agents who are willing to perhaps take our evidence and drive forward in their jurisdictions is critical. And public messaging and awareness. That's part of why I'm here. I think that tailored messages, cautious messages to educate the public about the risks, and I think specifying them to the types of fraud that they may be most at a risk of. I think that, the anti-fraud message has to be tailored to different audiences because we see major differences in the victim sets, whether it's romance fraud, investment fraud, IT fraud, or whatever. But over to you, Stephen.
Thanks, James. So let's give you some examples of disruptions that we've done here at Microsoft. Again, hopefully folks here in the audience are familiar with the DCU, or the Digital Crimes Unit, the team that I have the privilege of leading. But we're effectively the team here at Microsoft that takes our unique visibility and figures out ways to disrupt and degrade cyber threat actors operating online. And that applies to nation-state actors, traditional cybercrime threat actors, as well as people operating in the fraud and scam space. And we do that in a few ways. We do that just similar to James's slide. We do that through civil actions, the actions we take ourselves. We do it through partnerships with law enforcement, providing criminal referrals, information about attribution, helping identify crypto wallets and servers. We also work with external partners. We've done disruptions against fraud groups in partnership with Amazon, in coordination with foreign law enforcement. So that's some of the things that we do. So I'm here to talk a little bit about some of the actions that we've done against actors or threat actors that have been abusing artificial intelligence technologies when tools become weapons. Again, what James mentioned our visibility. He's not going to be envious of our slide, which apparently converted to some weird formatting. But again, Microsoft, of course, has a really broad landscape. We have a wide array of products and services and users over billions of users in every continent across the globe. That gives us a unique visibility, a vantage point that enables us to see cyber threat activity probably like no other entity on Earth. While you can't see it here, we like to talk about, we see 100 trillion security signals per day. That's what traverses our network. And with the assistance of artificial intelligence and 34,000 full-time security engineers, we're monitoring those threats in order to help, alert customers or governments when we see threat actor activity, to help increase the security of our products and services. And from a DCU perspective, identify opportunities for us to take proactive action in order to disrupt and hopefully dismantle certain threat groups that pose risks to our customers. The DCU's mission is pretty simple: lead the fight against cybercrime and to protect customers. That's it. So again, how is AI impacting cybercrime? James mentioned it. Ginny mentioned it. It's a productivity tool. Bad actors. They're some of the most opportunistic people on planet Earth, especially in the cyberspace, and they're using these productivity tools just as we are to accelerate their activity, to increase their efficacy. Why is it important in the world of cybercrime? Because AI lowers the bar of entry, or lowers the bar for cybercriminal actors. Less sophisticated people are able to do more sophisticated things. AI expands the playing field for cybercrime actors. Again, it increases the speed, scale, and automation of cyber attacks, and it allows the cyber threat actors to focus on the more different aspects of their crimes, while leaving AI to handle the more of the mundane parts of their activity that's necessary, like basic research or content generation, similar to how we write emails in our daily work. We see AI used, we talked about impersonation attacks. We see them use it in malware development or vulnerability testing. Obviously social engineering, and of course we see AI, generative AI, being used to just generate bad content, celebrity deepfakes. We've heard of, I know nobody likes the term, but like revenge porn for extortion reasons, stuff of that nature. This is how we see bad actors using generative AI. How good is AI? I always like to pose a test to the audience. One of these images is real and one is generated through AI technology. I mean, folks can guess. Just 4 millennials hanging out at a coffee shop. So the one on, I guess both are rights, is actually an AI-generated image based on the first. But again, we made a very mundane, benign image, but you can see how by using a real image, you could quite easily create content that looks photorealistic. So we're going to talk about 2 cases that we've 2 actions the DCU has taken recently. The first is called what we call FizzDog, but it's a group that we track internally formally as Storm 2139, but I'm going to call it FizzDog because the leader of the group was an individual that went by the handle Fizz. So this all arose from an incident that we detected just in June of 2024. And we, again, it was a security incident in the sense that we saw actors accessing some of our enterprise customers' accounts. And this group, what we discovered, was very clever. They realized that, again, AI services can be expensive unless you steal them. And also that consumer AI services have a lot of safety guardrails built in, so you can't do certain things, or they'll be detected and stopped. However, like most companies, on the enterprise side, enterprise customers have a little bit more flexibility to toggle their settings, their security, because it's up to them what they're using the AI services for. Perhaps they're testing, perhaps they're building models. And so in the AI sense, there's a little bit more flexibility to do things that you can never do on the consumer side. And that's what we saw these actors doing, developing tools that scrape the internet for exposed keys that allow them to get into Microsoft customer accounts, spin up these generative Azure OpenAI services, and then basically sell access to any buyer to create whatever generative content that they want. Importantly, this was not a Microsoft issue. They had these groups had similar tools for all the major generative AI companies out there. So as we'll talk about a little bit today, we identified the group, we ultimately identified some actors. But in January, well actually December, but unsealed in January, we filed an action to again disrupt them, to seize their the website that they use to collaborate with one another. We also then utilized the discovery process that the U.S. federal courts gave us access to then serve discovery on some of our partners, including Amazon, who provided valuable intelligence that helped us solidify our attribution, which we were able to identify, I would say, a dozen or more individuals who are part of this transnational group. We ultimately used our discretion, as you'll see, to name a few of them. And of course, we partnered with law enforcement, and we provided very extensive referrals to Europol and to the FBI in March of this year. So again, who were targeted by this type of activity? We talked about impersonation attacks. We talked about KYC bypasses. These are significant for crypto. They're significant for financial institutions. They're significant if you're LinkedIn. They're significant if you're Amazon and you're and folks are spinning up new accounts on the marketplace or on the cloud services side. And so we analyzed the data that we were able to collect, and we saw thousands and thousands of images. Some were mundane and some were not. So we focused on, for the purposes of our lawsuit, the ones that were not. And who were targeted? Women, celebrities. We all have read a lot and heard a lot about deepfake, celebrity nude shots and stuff like that. These are all included in the set that in the evidence that we collected. Underrepresented groups, people with generative AI, some people just want to create really horrible things. And of course, we saw this group targeting minors and children, some of the most vulnerable people out there. Oh, so here are some examples of some of the prompts that we collected as part of our evidence. So again, we filed a civil complaint in December. Again, our legal basis was violations are terms of service. Also, standard intrusion because they were accessing accounts without authorization. We used RICO charges, again, because this is a group who are located all across the globe, but collaborating, serving different roles in order to develop and sell these tools, and then use these tools to make bad content for use in other cyber campaigns, whatever their customers wanted. And again, what we did is we seized their main domain, and we then sent out discovery in order to solidify our attribution. So what did we see? So we at the DCU at Microsoft, we also in some ways act like investigators. We have undercover accounts on some of the main message boards, and here too we had infiltrated their main messaging board and was able to track what the conversation was and what the dialogue was leading up to the action and also after we filed an action. And what did we see? Originally, as soon as we filed the initial action, which again was John Doe, so it was Microsoft versus John Doe, unknown defendants. We saw them respond very boldly, very defiantly, very brazenly. Hey, Microsoft, kiss my, very defiant, that as if they are going to persevere despite the efforts of Microsoft. We also saw them dox some of our team. They actually found the attorneys that were assigned to the case. The top photo is Richard Boscovich, an attorney on DCU, and actually provided into the message boards information about him, his contact information, his personal email, stuff of that nature. And the photos below are our outside counsel. But you can see how these groups operated when we initially did our John Doe action. But what you also learned is there's a saying in the United States, of course, and I say in the United States because I said this abroad once and everyone looked at me like, that's not a saying, but there's no loyalty among thieves, right? And that's what you saw. Certain people in the message boards appreciated that, we were close at their heels, and they used the ironically, the information provided through the doxing to provide information about the group, about some of the actors in the group, which again solidified what we were seeing. And I know I'm running out of time, so I'm going to speed up here. And again, what we did in the end of February is we filed a amended complaint naming 4 of the key developers, identifying them by name, and also providing this information to law enforcement in referrals. So all of these individuals you can see are located in various countries around the world, but the key developers behind this operation. We were still in those message boards after we filed the amended complaint identifying people not so bold, not so defiant, not so brazen any longer, again, truly having a deterrent effect. We saw folks saying, oh my gosh, this is actually over. They must be in this message board. I don't want to go to jail, things of that nature. But the good news is, since we took this action, seized their infrastructure, this operation has effectively ceased operation altogether. So this was a disruption and a dismantling. I'm going to give you one last example because, again, it relates to generative AI and how it's used in the fraud and scam space specifically. Everyone's familiar with tech support fraud scams. They target elderly individuals. I say elderly, but maybe I'm getting closer to falling in that category. But effectively, people cold call. They send. They have fake ads. They do pop-ups, and they basically convince people that there's something wrong with their computer, and to ultimately get in contact, either pay money, but ultimately give access to their devices, which then that access is then used to upload additional malware, steal credit cards, steal retirement funds. So what we saw recently in partnership with one of our partners, the NPA, the Japanese National Police, and another organization out there, is that tech support started to spike in Japan. Historically, TSF has targeted English-speaking countries. I think historically, America, UK, were the countries with a lot of money. Japan has not experienced this until recently, and we saw this massive spike in TSF attacks attacking Japanese, again, predominantly older individuals. And they shared data with us proactively, and the DCU investigators in partnership with our Mystic team was able to identify one particular group based in India, a whole fraud syndicate that was behind this operation. And how did they do it? How did a group in India effectively attack victims in Japan? The answer was generative AI. We discovered that they were using AI to research their victims, to develop all the content for their pop-ups, and significantly to do translation services. So they were developing their content in English and then translating it into perfect Japanese, which again raised the efficacy rate of these attacks to rates that you don't see in the United States. So ultimately what happened is this is one of those instances where we worked in close collaboration with external partners. We actually brought together India's CBI, their Central Bureau of Investigation, and Japan's NPA, who had never worked together before, put them in a room, built this connective tissue, and ultimately in May, they obviously did their own investigation, expanded and built upon it, and ultimately took action in May of this year where they conducted raids at 19 different locations, not just call centers, but all the way up the chain to the facilitators operating in India. They arrested 6 and seized a bunch of infrastructure. I like to end on this chart because I think it shows the impact of disruptions. This chart shows the number of tech support fraud complaints filed with the NPA over the course of May 2025 through the date May 30th, the date we took the action, where the complaint level went to 0. Now, since then, we've asked for updates. There have been more TSF complaints, but they are in the 10 and lower range per day, nowhere near the 70+ range these were hitting at its peak. So this is an example of, again, through public-private partnerships, how we can disrupt actors misusing artificial intelligence. We use AI too. I know them over time, so we use AI too as defenders. It's not only a weapon, it's a tool. I won't go into it because I know we're out of time, and I'm going to end with thank you. I appreciate it.
Hello.
Hello. Oh, this is so cool. Can you hear me?
It's kind of neat.
Oh,
I'm digging
that's so
it.
neat. Okay.
So I'm Chris Compton. I'm from the Central Fraud and Abuse Risk team here at Microsoft, and our job is to protect the company, our services, and our customers. And one of the things that was really, really important for us to talk about here is the idea of collaboration just across the entire ecosystem. And this is really a thing that, it's why we're all here, right? This is why this venue exists, because we want to collaborate. For many, many years, Microsoft has said, we don't compete on security. It's not a differentiating advantage for us. It's not something that we think, well, we can be secure. And, there's some practical, ethical reasons for that. But also, essentially, if we said, well, we compete on security, what we're saying is, it's totally cool. When we go camping, we don't have to outrun the bear because we just have to outrun our friend, and then the friend gets eaten, and we're fine. Which doesn't work for a bunch of reasons, not least of which is that there are enough bears for everyone. So we can't outrun all the bears unless we work together. And so one of the really important collaborations we've had at Microsoft has been with Amazon. And Stephen talked a bit just now about some of the more practical things. But we really wanted to kind of talk about how that's been possible, how we're using AI along those lines, and where we think we're going with it. So with that, I suppose I want to throw it to you and get your opinion from an Amazonian perspective.
Yeah, I wish I had a good bear story to tell here to kick things off. But no, I was struck by some of the numbers that Stephen cited, just from Microsoft's perspective, thinking about 100 trillion signals a year. Like, that's a huge number. And I was like, a day. All right, so let's break that down, right? Like even further, like that is incredible, right? And so you think about just the volume of those data and trying to compare notes. Like, I can't keep 5 things in my head, let alone 100 trillion on a daily basis. And so just the importance of leveraging AI to distill sort of the signals from the noise, pick up on patterns, and ensure that we are able to meet the challenge of the scale of what we're up against. And the use of AI is just absolutely paramount in that. And I don't have a bear analogy. I have an elephant one. I just thought of. I'm going to throw that in there.
Please.
Okay, here we go. But if you think about sort of the role of collaboration when it comes to information sharing and leveraging AI, you think about all of us, Microsoft and Amazon. We're looking sort of at an elephant through a straw, right? And if you think about that, we're able to see just a little piece of this massive behemoth of a challenge we're up against. And so it's important we kind of string our straws together to see more of the elephant.
Absolutely. And I think this is really a key thing we're finding as we share. What we find is that terrible things that hit your network come from our network sometimes, and vice versa. And so we've got this ability to, string our straws together, to see the elephant all up, to get the whole visibility on it. Part of what's made that possible, at least for us, is AI. We talk a lot about, some of the very scary things that AI can do around deep fakes, around advanced things, and we talk about some of the really amazing things we can do around detection, seeing new patterns that we could never see before. But a lot of the value for us really is just force multiplication. It's scale. It's a problem I know we've had with data sharing in the past, where you get kind of one of two things. You either get kind of really fluffy statements of loose types of threats that I can't really do anything with, or I get buried in so much data that we can't get through it and we can't find anything, and we're just overrun and it falls to bits. And now, with this constant scaling, and we've seen all of these numbers, fraud is growing. It's a bigger problem year over year. I don't know about the rest of you. My staff is certainly not growing linearly with the problem.
Amazon, we have an internal value around frugality and doing more with less, and so yes, we are.
Yeah. I'd love to go to my CFO and say, hey, I need this many more people. I wouldn't finish the sentence before I was escorted from the room, I suspect. And so really that's one of the huge, just really practical things is now I can take one of my investigators and I can give them a team of AI agents to support them, to help them. AI is not, I wouldn't begin to want to replace the expertise of my experts on the subject. But instead what I can do is I can save their brain power, their time, for the things that only they can do. So the things that we can have a machine do, we must have a machine do. Yep. Because machines are frankly much cheaper than these people. And so if I can really save them for the things that they're really good at, they're really specialized at, that is hugely important for us. And that's what allows us to share this kind of information at this scale, I think.
Yeah, I think it's so important to call out that AI is not a one-for-one with human capabilities. You have certain things that AI is really good at, but you know what? AI doesn't build relationships. They don't feel out a room. They don't necessarily see sort of the energy that's being expressed from one human being to another. And in my panel earlier today, and even in this session, we're talking about collaboration and the human role in being able to trust each other. Even Amazon, Microsoft, right? Like we have co-opetition in the house here, there are absolutely things that our expert investigators here at Amazon would do exceptionally well, and we could never replace with AI, thank God.
No. And to think that, again, one of the things that enables our relationship is that we have our investigators who call your investigators, and vice versa. And, I will also, I suppose, add the call to the room here that we want to be more reliant on sharing data. We want to, again, work together on this giant elephant of a problem that, I know we're both investing heavily in, for example, the global signal exchange and some of the directions there. Because essentially one of the things we've found is that attackers are not brand loyal. I've yet to see any attackers that are, oh, well, I'm really, Microsoft, they're the ones to defraud. We won't bother with Amazon. It's a great platform. But ultimately, we see this thing, and given the opportunity to work collectively, I think that's really going to be one of the things. I know Kelly from our company and a few others are talking about, can we win the war on AI? And the answer I would say is that it's not a matter of winning the war on AI or winning the war with AI. It's simply a matter of we're all trying to work together to stop fraud. A whole bunch of fraudsters are working together to stop us.
Yeah. I think, one of the things that I've found is often sort of leapt over and not called out as explicitly as maybe we should, is that the good news is that, like you were saying, collaboration is happening already. We are already sharing information in many ways, whether it's between organizations or through platforms like the Global Signal Exchange, but also with law enforcement and others. So the information exchange is already happening. It needs to happen more. And information exchange is only as valuable as it is useful. And so when I look at something like the Global Signal Exchange, which I think has tremendous promise and is making huge strides possible, we have a lot of work yet to do on the Global Signal Exchange. Mm-hmm. And I'm looking over there because all those people are on that side of the room. So everybody kind of give them the eye. They can feel it from across the curtain there. But the Global Signal Exchange as fantastic as it is and as excited as we are about it, is in its infancy. We have to leverage the global signal exchange, continue to get people plugged in to use it, and develop really compelling use cases and proof points of what results are possible coming out of the global signal exchange. It's just a tool.
Well, and so much, it's a tool.
Which I love, but
the
also
merit is what we do with it, right?
Correct.
It's the tool doesn't fix it.
Correct.
The tool doesn't solve it. We absolutely could fumble it and get no value out of it.
Correct.
I don't think we're going to. And it's because at the end of the day, what we want is practical action. We want to be able to kick bad people off of our network. We want to be able to take the lessons we learn and improve our sources. We've had, great cases where data sharing has exposed vulnerabilities we had that were previously unknown in Microsoft's systems. And we say, well, oh gosh, how are you seeing? Oh my gosh, you're seeing it because we're open. Oh wow, and we had to scramble and patch things, and that's only possible because of the sharing. But the focus on not the tool, not the technology, not the vector, but fundamentally that someone is attempting to steal from our customers and harm our customers, and we're attempting to stop them. That I think is what makes all of this go.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the models that I think is incredibly promising, that if you have not heard of it yet or are interested in plugging in on this front, is the National Elder Fraud Coordination Center. And that's led by a guy who's sitting on that stage over there named Brady Finta. But that is just a really exciting model when it comes to collaboration and information sharing. You have this organization that's actually embedded within the NCFTA, for those who are familiar, and there is a direct connection of law enforcement to private companies like Amazon, Microsoft, Walmart, Google, AARP, others, who are all sharing information through secure channels in all the responsible ways, but building those cases, as Stephen said, putting those cases together to help enforcement sort of do their job more quickly and go after bad actors at scale. So highly encourage you all to check out that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I'm getting the we're about out of time signal. Anything you want to add from Amazon's perspective?
I've said it several times, but I will just underscore, technology is just a piece of the solution here. It's incredibly important, the role of AI, the role of facilitating information sharing, distilling those signals through what can be a very noisy space. But the human component and the working together cannot be undervalued. We have tremendous ways to go. We are a group of the willing. There are many people who are not here today who also need to be on this journey with us. And so I would just sort of pose a challenge and encourage all of you in this room and those who are joining online to continue to push for more collaboration, more opportunities to work together to see the full elephant.
Absolutely. And I just want to say, for all of the sharing that's already happened, all the partnership, thank you to Amazon, thank you to GSC and GASA, and to all the people in the audience we know we're already working with. It really is a function together. And so we're very happy to be on this journey with you.
All right. Thanks all.
All right, Alex, we get to round out the discussion today talking about public awareness. So as we think about these different layers of solutions, layers of ways of disrupting and mitigating fraud, public awareness is the one that maybe outside of this building is the one that's certainly relevant to the vast majority of people who are concerned. And it's been a pleasure, Alex, to work with you, to work with Oates for the past year and a half. I know as the technology-focused training arm associated with the AARP, you guys are on the front lines, talking with older adults, getting a sense of what's top of mind. So set the scene for us. When you're out talking with older adults, what are they thinking about AI? What's top of mind?
Well, first thing, my headshot looks like AI, but I used to have hair, and I need a new headshot. So that's the first thing I'll start with. Yeah, I mean, I think fraud and scams have always been a huge part of the work we do. You know, Oates, Older Adults Technology Services from AARP. We've been around for 20 years working at the intersection of aging and technology. And one of the premier issues that older adults have always been worried about since we started doing this work in 2004 was protecting themselves online. It's a perennial hot topic for us and always has been. But I think what we're seeing now with the advent of AI and its kind of rapid development is that the efficiency at which scams and fraud can be perpetuated is much quicker. Older adults fall victim to frauds and scam much more frequently than their younger counterparts. And when we actually did a survey, and I took some notes so I could mention them here. We did a survey of 1,500 older adults. The average age was about 76. And we asked them, what are the top 3 things you're worrying about in regards to AI? And the top 3 things were fraud and scams, misinformation, and personal privacy and security. So when you ask someone who's, let's say an average age of 76, those are the top 3 things they're worried about. But then to counter that, there's also a lot of excitement. So we also ask people, what are you excited about with AI? And what do you think it could do for you in your life as you age? People are really excited just to be able to ask it questions and have it explain things. A lot of people are using it for writing, and people are also seeing the customer service benefits that are coming from AI. So I think we're probably closing with that, but there's just a mixture of perception. And one of the things that I think is probably different than what most people would expect is older adults are using AI at a very, very rapid pace. The diffusion of technology and that curve that kind of takes the late adopters more and more time to adopt new technology, which are often older adults, is accelerating, and AI is reaching older adults much quicker, and their usage of AI is quite high compared to what we've seen with other emerging technologies in the past.
Yeah. No, I've always appreciated that perspective that Oates has brought of we need to take the challenges and harms of AI seriously, but also take the curiosity and opportunity to build broader AI understanding. And I feel like that feeds into the question of when we're talking about public awareness, when we're talking about what do people need to know about AI to protect themselves from scams and fraud, that yes, there's necessity to build understanding, to be aware of the risks, but there's also a distinction between information that is actionable and empowering and information that is overwhelming and drives fear without driving a lot of understanding or ability to implement that information. I'm curious if that take resonates with how you guys have been thinking.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think the foundational digital skills that we seek to build among older adults hold true really in the usage of any technology, whether it's AI or not. So the first thing we tell people when they're interacting with something that they think may be AI generated and maybe fraudulent is to just take a beat, pause, wait. And we've been saying that for 20 years, back when there were just email attachment scams or other scams that were much simpler. So take a beat, wait. Use your common sense. People, when they get in these situations where they're being confronted with something and that urgency is thrust upon them, like you must do this or your computer will be shut off, and that's not always obviously AI generated, but just in general, older adults are more likely to act on those types of threats than the regular population. So we tell people to use their common sense and go straight to the source. Think about, if someone's actually emailing you or it looks too good to be true, it probably is. And the foundational skills that we build among older adults with our programs, which we deliver nationally through AARP channels and elsewhere, really seek to instill that foundational confidence that you need to interact with technology, and the basics really cut across any new and emerging thing, whether it's AI or not. So I think the work that we've been doing for 20 years is still really valid and relevant. It just needs to be upgraded with some of kind of the more mainstream advent of like how these things are being perpetuated.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Something we've talked about as well is what does change because of AI? Your point's well taken that a lot of the foundational skills, knowledge, vigilance, willingness to verify, cross-check, pause, all that advice sort of is still very valid in the age of AI. But also thinking about what is advice that maybe was useful a decade ago that's starting to be something that people had internalized then, that we maybe want to push them towards, this might be a place where you want to update your understanding.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think, 10 years ago, it was scams were a little easier to spot. The email typos were kind of obvious. There were, dollar signs instead of S's, lots of extra spaces. And AI has, I'll say, professionalized the way that these scams and other frauds are sort of sent out. So it's not that easy anymore to detect that something is potentially a scam. The visualization, that image that was shown by the prior speakers, you can't really even distinguish what's real and what's not anymore. But in the past, you could. And I think that now it's way harder to actually determine when something is fake or not. And that sophistication that AI brings, and also the efficiency at which these nefarious actors can push out scams really rapidly is affecting the whole kind of landscape. But again, if people are able to go back and rely on that foundational skill set that they've built related to digital literacy, then I think they'll be able to protect themselves.
Yeah. No, that's well taken as well. I feel like the other piece that is relevant in digital literacy media, which I think about more broadly, is this sense of people want to look at a piece of content and say, if I look hard enough and I think hard enough and I know the 10 tips that something might be AI, I can just stay looking at this piece of content and use my judgment. And the advice, whether it is fraudulent content or more broadly when you're encountering content online, being you can't tell just by critically thinking. You have to get off the original source. You have to open a new tab. You have to look at context. You have to look at provenance. That can be counterintuitive, because I think there is inherent in a lot of advice that people might be getting around AI is this sense of like, oh, and now you need to be a digital forensics expert.
Yeah, I think, and that's not true. I mean, you don't need that. You need what you're saying, common sense. You need to take a pause, remove yourself from that current situation or that current, area that you're in, that input is coming to you where you're questioning it. Call someone, call a friend, phone a friend, call a family member. Take time to, you leverage your networks. And, a lot of the work that we do is also about building social connection. And through community, through education, I think that we can do, a really great job at protecting older adults from fraud and scams, which, is a lot of the work that we wound up doing now.
Yeah. One of the other spaces that we're watching closely, and I know is top of mind, is to what extent AI is being used in personalization. And so one of the findings from Ginny's keynote that I found interesting when we were looking at the data was when you start to break down impersonation scams, and that all of the impersonation scams are happening, about 10% of them are leveraging sort of a personal relationship of some kind. And that's not conclusive about the degree to which personalization may or may not be happening, but it feels like the data is saying this is on the horizon, but maybe not quite here yet. And I honestly think that might be a place where we're sort of grappling with what's the degree of alarm, what's the exact advice we want to be giving to older adults on this front. But yeah, certainly something top of mind.
Yeah, I mean, we've had some of the participants in our programs who have come and actually have had sort of an imposter personalization type scam, come at them, specifically from grandkids, that we saw a few of those come recently. It was, voice modulation, changing someone's voice, or, replicating voice to kind of try and extort someone, actually. So I don't know how prevalent they are, but I do think that older adults are always going to be probably on the bleeding edge of risk, I think, in this whole realm as it is. And I think that through education, more public awareness, which we talked about earlier, that gets people familiar with the fact that when they're looking at something, oh, hey, I saw this, in a program I took or in the media, and maybe it isn't real, and maybe I should take a step back. But, waiting around for, kind of happy ending to occur is not going. We really have to be proactive in addressing this, I think, writ large.
Yeah. Well, maybe one final thought to round us out. When we think of information about AI that might be overwhelming or unhelpful, I'm trying to think, as you guys have adjusted or gotten feedback on the types of content that you're delivering, are there pieces where you're like, you know what, this might be interesting, but maybe not useful or actionable?
Yeah, I mean, I think older adults want the practicality associated with AI, so they don't, in the survey that I was citing before, the things that they are not really concerned with and not really interested in is sort of like the global takeover or the iRobot type, dystopian future that might affect people in the future or years from now. So I think when the content gets kind of broadened beyond the fact where it has practical applicability to later age, then it's going to kind of fall on deaf ears among the older adult population. So we always try and liken or relate the content back to, their day-to-day lives. How could AI be a benefit to you? And maybe you can actually even use it to combat fraud and scams rather than, thinking it's going to be the thing that's accelerating those scams upon you. So practicality is always the key. Relevance is always the key. And I think if we keep those as sort of guideposts, older adults will be more likely to stay engaged and learn and be more equipped to, protect themselves. So.
Well, that's an excellent note to finish on and an excellent segue to Ginny, who will close us out with the point you brought there, which is how is AI being used in ways that maybe are hope-bringing in terms of their ability to mitigate scams and fraud.
Thanks.
Okay. I know pretty much everyone who just spoke, and I knew a lot of the content, but I will be honest, I learned things, and I found it fascinating. So I took a few notes. What did we learn so far today? We learned that bad actors are using AI to increase scale and impact of attacks. We learned that so far we're not seeing a lot of novel usage, at least not reaching a large percentage, but we are seeing that it can lead to novel attack vectors, such as the example Stephen gave about all of a sudden seeing an uptick in scams in Japan, where that hadn't been done before and was largely enabled because of AI. We also learned that we need to stay out ahead of these novel threats, including by giving law enforcement the tools that they need through responsive legislation, make sure that when they do identify the bad actors, they have the tools they need and the laws to act on them and to actually take them down. We also learned that collaboration is the key to unlocking progress through public-private partnerships, as well as partnerships across the private sector, and that we don't compete when it comes to stopping scams, and together we're able to collectively outrun the bear. I'm going to use that analogy again. And we also learned that education efforts remain critical to protecting the most vulnerable. We owe them the tools to protect themselves as the threat landscape is shifting. And I think we all see that the trajectory of this landscape, while we're not in that scary, scary territory quite yet, we are seeing it's heading that direction. And there's a lot more we can all be doing collectively to help protect the most vulnerable. And we also learned that AI can be used as a tool to protect. It is not just a weapon. So we wanted to end with a little bit more of a positive note about where we are seeing successful uses of AI in protecting. And you'll hear this more generally in the cybersecurity space. If you talk to cybersecurity folks who are typically pretty negative, they just see the worst of things and they see that things are getting harder and protecting against cyber attacks are really bad. But one area that I do consistently hear from those folks is AI is actually the perfect tool to help protect. It's all about pattern spotting. It's all about identifying the anomaly and doing it quickly and then being able to act quickly. And while you always want a human in the loop on those kinds of activities, having AI as a tool on your side is going to be particularly effective. And so we want to talk a little bit about that. So as I mentioned, spotting patterns is something that AI is particularly good at. So whether we're talking about cybersecurity log patterns, or if you're talking about actually fraud patterns, it's particularly good at that. There's also ways that we have seen some technology being able to do real-time scam warnings during a phone call. And so there's the one thing of, you get an indicator on your phone before you even answer that it might be a scam. That's incredibly helpful. But actually there are ways that there are some interventions when you're in the middle of a call where you can actually be warned that this is a scam. And so that's a really exciting thing that I know when it comes to protecting the most vulnerable will be particularly useful. So that's something to keep an eye on. Blocking scam pop-ups that take over your computer screen, this is a tale as old as time, and yet this continues to be a challenge that people face. And we're finding that AI is particularly useful when it comes to identifying which of those pop-ups are in fact scam pop-ups and blocking them at the beginning. And Microsoft Edge actually has a product like this. It's our scareware blocker that we recently released. And we're finding that AI is really helping in the fight against those fraudulent pop-ups. And then this one is kind of fun. There are actually a lot of organizations, I've heard stories, who are using AI to waste time of AI. There's something called like the grandma bot that I've heard about on like NPR or something. And then there are some projects that we've been working with other organizations on as well, which essentially says you can use AI to scam AI as well when they're trying to scam you. And I think that that's a particularly novel and fun way to take their time, collect information, and then also figure out where that is coming from. So those are just some fun and positive uses of AI in this space. I know that these are just the tip of the iceberg, but again, we also know that we're at the very early stages of what we're seeing as far as the bad actors as well. So I want to just thank all of the presenters and panelists. What you all just heard is not just really smart people, but it's a lot of work. There's been a lot of work happening across these teams and with our partners, many of you who are in the audience. So thank you for your time today. Thanks to our panelists, and I hope you all enjoy the rest of GASA.